we're really starting to get to the point where AAA gaming needs to change its focus. I don't really think I'm alone in this opinion. It's kind of been building for a while, but especially these last few years, I think there's been enough evidence that the big publishers, the big gaming companies, they need to wake up. Will they wake up? Who knows? Maybe not just yet, but I think it's still interesting to dive into. You could also title this video something along the lines of us needing less live service games, because that's really where this all started. You could argue that MMOs like RuneScape and World of Warcraft, they were the beginning of this trend where games constantly need to make money. RuneScape had its paid membership tier, and World of Warcraft just sort of flat out required a subscription to play. You could also say that maybe Destiny, with its persistent world and multiple expansions, that was kind of heading in that direction. But the live service model was truly solidified in my mind thanks to Fortnite. Now, I don't hate Fortnite. I used to play it a little bit. I dipped into it from time to time, and I actually played the original Save the World Fortnite game, which was a bit of a mix of survival and tower defense, zombie fighting type of thing. But they did pivot really quickly, and they were one of the first to go all in on that battle royale genre, and then onto those core concepts of live service games that we see today, such as seasons and battle passes. There were some earlier, simpler versions of battle passes in games, so Dota 2 had some and Battlefield 3 had one, but I really think that Fortnite made it mainstream. So it wasn't the first, but in my mind Fortnite was the first one that was a huge success. And in fact, I read that one of the earlier battle passes in 2018 sold 50 million times in one single day. So, you know, of course that got the attention of these major gaming developers and publishers. Fast forward to today then, and these business models are absolutely everywhere in gaming. Fortnite's still going strong. You've got your Call of Duties jumping on the bandwagon, your Diablos. FIFA does it slightly differently with the Ultimate Teams rather than battle passes, but almost every company is trying to get you to stick to its game, play it for as long as possible, and continue to buy things from their games. Most of the time these are cosmetics, nothing gameplay altering, so when it first started it actually kind of felt harmless. And I think there were even plenty of arguments at the time that these first started appearing. You know, it's not a bad thing, throw the developers a few extra purchases now and then, support your favorite game. I bought skins from League of Legends kind of frequently during my time with that game, and the premise originally was that it allowed a game to keep getting updates and new additions, and it would allow the game to keep getting worked on because of that financial support, so that's a good thing, right? But now we're at a point where I think the concept of live service is doing much more harm to the gaming industry than good. Every developer now wants to have that next successful live service game, not just to cover the costs of working on the game that they want to work on, but because a successful live service game makes so much money now. All these developers and publishers, they're all pouring huge amounts of time and effort into creating what they think could be the next big game. There's plenty of single player ideas that have been reworked to try and cram some kind of multiplayer microtransaction based model in, you know, and a lot of it is thanks to the greed of these bigger corporations. Gone are the days when having a successful game is enough. You know, you used to read stories of early gaming studios where they were just hoping that the profits from one release were enough that they could then go on to make another game because that was just what they loved doing. Now it's completely different. After all, why release a game that makes a moderate amount of money when instead you can release a different type of game that makes 10 times the amount, or maybe even 100 times that amount of money? At least that's the logic of plenty of these bosses that head up these giant public companies. Unfortunately, there are lots of problems with this that those companies and the people making the decisions, they just don't seem to quite be understanding. Maybe they're too high up, they're too far away from the gaming industry. First of all, you're often forcing development teams to switch gears. You're asking them to make something that they either aren't interested in making, or in some cases they have no experience making before, or both. So let's take Crystal Dynamics as an example. That team, when it was still part of Square Enix, the development studio had a pretty good amount of success with the modern Tomb Raider trilogy, and then they turned their eyes to Marvel's Avengers. Now, I remember reading that originally it was supposed to be a single player experience, but a decision was made, and we think by Square Enix, it was made higher up to turn it into a live service game. Whether that's true or not, or maybe it was always supposed to be a live service game, you know, either way, you have a very strong single player studio with success on these 3 single player games suddenly making a live service online superhero game, which is totally different to what they'd been successful at before. Now, Avengers did have a single player story mode, and it was actually pretty good. I enjoyed it, and it was one of the areas of the game that seemed to resonate pretty well with reviewers and the public. But once you completed that and you really got into the live service aspect, the game fell down pretty quickly. Reused environments, progression wasn't great, and especially to start with, it was absolutely full full of bugs and broken features. So players got bored and they fell away. Crystal Dynamics did what they could to bring in new content as fast as possible, but it wasn't really enough. And Square Enix came right out and they said that despite strong initial sales, the game was a failure commercially. Not enough players were sticking around to continue to buy things. I think the biggest kicker was when the progression was sort of purposefully made slower and then a paid real money experience boost was added to the store, and that drew a lot of controversy. The game was taken offline in September 2023, and as we probably all know, Square Enix sold Crystal Dynamics to the Embracer Group not long after. Unfortunately, this isn't a lone example. Arcane's Austin studio made the Prey reboot. Don't think it had anything to do with the original Prey games. I never played those, and this game wasn't hugely successful, but it was an incredible immersive sim. It was loved to death by those interested in the genre, and it provided something different. There weren't a lot of immersive sims coming out, there still aren't, and so it was great for those fans to get a game that they really loved. Arcane Austin's next game, well, that was Redfall, a very different type of game for them. It was a multiplayer online shooter, it had live service aspects, and it just didn't play very well at all. Redfall was another huge failure. Suicide Squad. Rocksteady made the hugely popular Batman Arkham games, and their next project was to try their hand at an online looter shooter. At the time of writing, it has less than 100 concurrent players on Steam, and the publisher Warner Brothers has taken a $200 million loss on that game. Skull and Bones was in development for 11 years and supposedly also cost about $200 million to make. All players really wanted from Skull and Bones was a follow-up to Assassin's Creed Black Flag, and instead they got a live service sailing game, and the result is a tiny player base. Then most recently we have Concord. The game's exact budget is unknown. There have been some crazy rumors that it cost $400 million to make. Not really sure if that's true. Some of the more conservative estimates are around $100 million development budget, and yes, that's right. Those are the conservative estimates of $100 million. It's also been estimated that they have only sold 25,000 copies of the game, which at $40 each totals to just $1 million in revenue back. So the game basically could just be pure loss for Sony, and it was shut down within 2 weeks of its release. So why do these games fail? Why are we as gamers becoming less and less interested in them? I mentioned already that the people working for these companies, they just might not be so enthusiastic to make them, and also be less experienced in that area, and I do think that's one big factor. If you haven't got passion or as much knowledge for your new project, then you're likely to get something inferior. Another big reason for me is that the amount of FOMO that is pumped into these games is kind of crazy these days. So I admitted earlier in the video that when I was really into League of Legends, I did spend money on the game. Over the years that I played League of Legends, I think it's fair to say that I gave Riot more money than I would have done if it was just an upfront transaction where you were buying the game. And that is obviously the aim of all of these live service companies, so they sort of succeeded in that sense with me. At the time though, League of Legends microtransactions were solely focused on two areas. The first one was unlocking new champions to play the game, and the second was skins to make those champions look different. So unlocking new champions, that might raise a red flag, but it wasn't really as bad as it might sound. There was still an in-game currency where you could also unlock new champions that way, and the balancing aspect of the game meant that the strongest champions were constantly changing. So by the time you were really getting into the game, you'd usually played enough that you had most of the champions that you wanted to unlock. You had them unlocked anyway. There wasn't really a pay to win element here. You were maybe just paying to unlock your favorite earlier if you wanted to, so sometimes people would start new accounts and they would buy their favorite champion right away. Champion skins, on the other hand, were real money only, but they had no impact on the gameplay at all. They made your champion look cooler if you wanted, if you liked them, but if you didn't like any of the skin options available, then there's no need to spend your money. At that time, I played matches of League basically every single day, and so from time to time, I felt happy to throw a little bit of money back towards them. And I think at the time when I played, most of the skins were somewhere between £5 and £10, which is what I think is a good example of a live service model done well. I played the heck out of the game because I really enjoyed the gameplay, and I would spend a little bit of money here and there for cool additional cosmetics. Nowadays though, live service games look very different because publishers use things like time gating and fear of missing out to try and convince players to play longer and spend more money. Shops have new skins or features that are only available for a limited amount of time, and then they rotate out and you don't know when they're going to come back. It could be weeks, it could be months, it could be never, so you better input your credit card details right now before you lose out. And battle passes, well, they only last for a few months. You pay for it up front, you pay that at £10, $10, something like that. But you still then have to play to unlock it, and if you don't, then you've essentially lost all of your money. In the early days, I picked up battle passes for games like Fortnite, and I don't even get halfway through them before the time runs out. And so it can almost become like a second job to make sure that you're getting everything out of that battle pass. If you paid for it, you want to get everything there, and you have to put a lot of time into it. This in itself is part of the problem that can occur with all of these new live service games coming out. Let's say you're really deep into Fortnite. Every season you get the battle pass and you completely unlock it all. Another live service game comes along and it wants to entice you out of that. Well, you've already put so much time and money into Fortnite that it's a big ask to move away to another game. Not to mention the gameplay has to at least be on par with, but in reality it probably has to be better for you to even consider it. And you know, if you are that really big Fortnite player, you're probably also weighing up what you might miss out on in Fortnite if you spend some time trying out this new alternative game. And then of course you have the other type of player who doesn't really spend much time playing live service games at all because they just think about how much work they can be, how much they have to resist the fear of missing out, and they sort of just decide that it's not worth it for them to even get into the game in the first place. And I've done that with plenty of live service games that have come out over the years. I just think I can't be bothered to put so much time and effort into one game. And of course we've seen those prices start to rise up. Skins definitely aren't £5 to £10 anymore. There have been games that charge, you know, 40 for one cosmetic. Players literally can't play all of these live service games. It's simply not possible with how much time they each demand. So a new one has to be something really special for it to even be considered. And I'm going to use the example of Helldivers 2 here because Helldivers 2 was a new live service game that did well. It was pretty cheap on release, it offered something quite different, and even the battle passes stuck around once you paid for them, so there was less pressure to just be constantly playing in order to complete those battle passes. Helldivers 2, I'd argue, is live service done much more fairly and along the lines with how things used to be and how things, you know, should be really. And that game peaked at Steam at something like 460,000 concurrent users, so it was a big success when it came out. Recently though, it's kind of in the peaks of around the 30,000 players. So even if a live service game is good and does well, how long are players really going to stick around playing the same game over and over? Now, not to be a total hypocrite or anything like that, but I do play some of these live service games. The one I think I play the most at the moment is Diablo 4, but I have been playing a few others. However, I would argue that I don't necessarily play these games the way that the publishers really intend them, and I think that more and more gamers are sort of swaying this way. So let's take Diablo 4 first. I play this because I enjoy the gameplay, I like ARPGs, I like messing around with builds, changing up where I've allocated skill points, which items I'm using, the legendary aspects that change certain things about your skills, and I just love how you can find one that you click with and it can take you in a completely different direction for your build. That is always a really good time for me. Diablo releases new seasons fairly frequently with new mechanics and new quest lines added in. They make changes to the classes, and so it's fun to jump in and out of if a season sounds interesting to you. However, I've not paid for any in-game currency so that I can buy the cosmetics in that game. I have bought the expansion that came out recently, but other than those, I can't see myself paying for anything else in Diablo, even in the future. I really like the game, but I'm not interested in buying the skins. I don't pay for any of the microtransactions. Similar to games like FIFA and Call of Duty, these are released on a very quick schedule, most of the time yearly, often with just a small amount of changes between the games, and especially in FIFA's case, that is a very big problem. Each year they cost £60, £70, and then you can spend more money in-game if you want. Call of Duty has the Battle Pass, FIFA has Ultimate Team where you can pay for more packs of player cards that they go in your Ultimate Team. And I do like to dip into these games from time to time, but I never buy them on release. Instead I wait for a sale and I don't buy them every year. I'll just get them every few years. And if, for example, I get a hankering to play some FIFA career mode, it doesn't feel like such a huge deal that I own EAFC 24 instead of EAFC 25. And just to touch on Helldivers again, I did play that for a while, I did enjoy it, but I just sort of fell away. I'm not one to play the same game every single week over and over and over. I think that the more publishers try to push these live service games onto us, the more, I'm going to refer to gamers as customers here, the more customers will start to get tired of the saturated market, and they're not going to continue to play the games in the way the publishers wanted. I think they're going to start to do things the same way as maybe me, or they're just going to ignore some of these games entirely. I know there are always some players who spend loads on these microtransactions, but you do still see it where a game stops being fun and the big spenders move away. So what is the alternative? Well, I sort of talked about this in my last discussion video where I talked about how there are very few games now on the modern generation of console, and I said that developers should be putting their money into making more games instead of releasing these sort of mid-gen console refreshes. A friend pointed out that I didn't really go far enough in saying what kind of games, and actually I think that fits in really well here. So what I think is that publishers shouldn't spend 50, 100, 150 million on live service games. Yes, they could be huge moneymakers, I understand that, but these days it feels like almost all of them are destined to be failures. So instead, divide that money up, start making a much wider range of experiences. Your hardcore Destiny 2 player probably barely considered moving over to Suicide Squad when it came out, or Foam Stars, or Hyperscape, or any of the other ones, even though they were targeting the exact same audience, because why move from a game that they already like, that they've spent years playing, players have spent years building up their Destiny 2 characters, why would they move to something else that demands, just the same huge number of hours from them every single month? That's not very likely to happen, I don't think, but they might be more tempted by something like Hogwarts Legacy or Astrobot, a single player game with a limited amount of time that you play it. It's much easier to commit to playing a single player game like that than it is to commit to trying out another ongoing live service game. And of course, single player successes are not unheard of, they're just less frequent in the AAA gaming space these days. And in my opinion, that's because AAA publishers now, they kind of have this tick box where, it's can this game constantly draw more money out from the player? And if that checkbox isn't ticked, then these projects don't always get approved by these public companies that just want to grow and grow and grow. On the other hand, a game like Dave the Diver, well, that did hugely well on a very small budget in comparison, but I just don't think that there's that many AAA studios that would greenlight that kind of project these days. The range of different types of games that these giant publishers are creating, well, that's been dropping steadily over time. It's been getting narrower and narrower because instead they want to try and focus on the maximum amount of profit possible. So make less games and try and make them make more money. Look at Microsoft. Tango Studios created Hi-Fi Rush, which was critically praised. It was loved by its fans. Now the game does fall into a bit of a niche, but it was really good to see a big publisher like Xbox coming out with something like this. The game reached 3 million players 6 months after release, thanks to Game Pass, which you can sort of question how many people might have bought it, but even one of the VPs came out and said that the game exceeded expectations, so it did well. But just this year, Microsoft closed this studio, and their reasoning was because they want to streamline their portfolio and deliver more on high impact franchises and games. So basically they want to sort of cut away these smaller projects and focus more on things like Call of Duty that they think could make them more money. And look, I partially understand the reasoning if you're thinking about it from purely numbers perspective. If Hi-Fi Rush makes $2 for every $1 put in, then that's good. But if something like Call of Duty makes $5 or $10 for every $1 put in instead, then Microsoft's going to focus on that. If you're purely interested in money, then yes, but they should also think about their responsibilities as some of the biggest gaming companies in the world. I think they should be leading the way in offering a huge range of gaming experiences. When we had sort of the PS3 days and the Xbox 360 games, there was such a wider range of games that you could buy on those consoles compared to now. Microsoft made 23 billion in free cash flow in Q2 this year alone. They can afford for some of these franchises to be slightly less successful than the others. Have more studios making a big variety of games, hire developers who want to work on those games as well. Don't move people over from a studio like Toys for Bob who make platformers, don't move them over to support Call of Duty. People used to really enjoy building up a collection of games that suited their tastes when there were more options available. They were proud to own and play their collections, and that is slowly going to go away if all of these big companies streamline their games into just a few live service offerings. Last year, Warner Brothers created Suicide Squad, which we talked about already, and Hogwarts Legacy. Hogwarts Legacy was the best-selling game of 2023. Suicide Squad was a failure. The Warner Brothers CEO said that they need to make more live service games. Sony's Concord has been shut down less than 2 weeks after it launched, but they still have Bungie working on a new live service IP. Meanwhile, Astrobot is currently the second highest rated game of 2024, only one Metascore behind the Elden Ring DLC. Baldur's Gate 3 was one of the most successful games of last year, but Larian Studios are not making any DLC or a sequel because just simply the team are not excited to make it. Larian are partially owned by Tencent, but the founders of Larian still have the largest stake and they get to make all the decisions, and that's what they've decided to do. If this was a big bigger publisher or it was a public company, how long do you think it would be before we got an announcement for the next Baldur's Gate, and ever so slowly those really talented developers at that studio would get fed up, they wouldn't want to make it, they would slowly leave. At the time I'm making this video, I've been playing Space Marine 2, and this is exactly the type of game that I think we need more of right now. I'm not too sure of the budget. I have looked around online, but all I've been able to find is that the budget of Space Marine 2 was less than half of that of Doom Eternal. So, you know, that doesn't sound too bad to me. It doesn't sound like it cost a fortune to make. The game has been widely successful. I managed to find that it had over 2 million players at launch, and it's not hard to understand why. In an age where every company is going after the live service model, and at the same time it feels like AAA developers have barely made any games that have been worthy of that sort of next gen stamp, Space Marine 2 feels like a breath of fresh air. It looks absolutely gorgeous for a start, the scenes are amazing, the views you get, the number of enemies on screen at once, and there's little details like air jets coming out from the vents in the armor. It feels like the type of game that you could never get running on last generation hardware. It's got a single player campaign, it's got extra missions, you can play it in co-op, there's PvP with loads of customization for your PvP characters included, and you know, if you want a little bit of extra customization for those characters, there's a cheap DLC bundle to get more colors and insignias rather than each individual one being a microtransaction. The gameplay is a lot of fun as well, and the game just has this feeling that there's been a lot of effort put into it. The campaign isn't the longest, but between all the different modes it feels like you can get a lot here for your money. The PvP actually is really fun. I wasn't expecting it to be just as fun as it is, so you know, you could get hours and hours out of this game without paying any extra for it. I'm not saying that Space Marine 2 is a system seller necessarily, but imagine if Sony or Microsoft made, you know, just a few more games like this every year, spread them out over a couple of different genres. I'm sure that that would fit within the budget of a Concord or something like that, and all of a sudden the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series consoles, they look a lot more appealing to a lot more gamers because they have a wider range of games available. Saber Interactive didn't just try to make another battle royale, they made this instead, and players showed up for it, and we need the bigger publishers to understand that too. The gaming community, I think, is really starting to tire of live service games. AAA publishers need to stop trimming their interesting projects in order to funnel more and more money into live service games. Otherwise, I can see a future where it's not impossible that they will only have a few active IPs left. And what happens when gamers get tired of those few active IPs as well? There won't be any more surprise hits, there won't be anything for those publishers to fall back on, and I think most importantly, there'll be no reputation left for those studios, no reason why anybody would trust them to deliver a game that delights audiences again after, you know, a long time of only going after these live service games. AAA gaming needs a change of focus, and it needs to start now.